I still remember the sound of that zipper. It was such a small thing, a single, sharp sound. But that's when I knew it was over. Not the kind of fight over. Not the kind of we'll talk tomorrow over. It was the sound of a life being folded, packed, and sealed shut. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that once, I loved someone enough to lose myself completely. And by the time I realized it, there was nothing left of me to save. I'd spent years believing love meant patience, forgiveness, silence. That if I stayed quiet through his storms, maybe one day, he'd notice the way I was drowning. But people don't notice silence. They get used to it. That morning, I packed my bags not because I stopped loving him, but because I couldn't remember who I was outside of him. Every shirt I folded was a memory. Every drawer I emptied was a version of me that had stayed hoping he'd change. And then, as I lifted my suitcase, I caught my reflection. Eyes red, hands shaking, but there was something new there. Strength. The kind that comes after breaking 1,000 times. I was ready to leave. I was ready to choose myself for once. But just as I reached the door, he said 3 words. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about love, forgiveness, and endings changed forever. They say love begins quietly, in small smiles, in the spaces between words. Maybe that's why I never noticed when it started dying. It disappeared the same way it came, quietly. I met him on a rainy afternoon 3 years ago. I was sitting in a cafe, writing in a small brown notebook I carried everywhere. I used to write about people, strangers, moments, stories I'd never live but could feel through words. And he noticed. He walked up to me with that easy smile, that kind of confidence that makes you feel like you've known someone forever. He said, "You look like you're writing about me." And I laughed. God, I actually laughed. It was such a strange thing to say, but something about him felt safe. Maybe it was the way his voice softened when he spoke, or how he didn't look away even when I did. That day turned into coffee into late-night talks, and before I knew it, he had become the story I stopped writing about, because I was living it. In the beginning, he made me feel seen. Every word, every dream, every fear. He wanted to know it all. He'd listened so carefully that it made me forget how much silence had existed before him. But love, real love, it changes. Slowly, almost invisibly. At first, it was just small things. Fewer messages, longer silences. Then the laughter started fading between us. I used to tell myself it was normal, that every relationship loses its spark after a while. But deep down, I knew something was breaking. He stopped asking about my stories. He stopped listening, and I stopped talking. Sometimes he'd come home late, tired, lost in his own world. I'd be waiting, smiling, pretending it didn't hurt that he'd rather scroll through his phone than look at me. I told myself love was about patience, about waiting for the storm to pass. But what if the storm was the love? There were nights I'd sit by the window, watching the lights of the city, wondering if I'd done something wrong, if I'd stopped being enough. I'd ask him, "Are you happy?" And he'd say, "Of course." Why would you ask that? That why always hit me harder than the words themselves, because it meant he didn't even see what was breaking. I tried to fix things. I cooked his favorite meals, planned little surprises, wrote him notes like I used to in the early days. He'd smile, thank me, and go back to his work. I kept giving, and giving, until I didn't know what I was giving anymore. The house we'd built together started feeling colder. His presence felt like an echo, familiar, but hollow. And every time I looked at him, I saw the man I once knew slowly disappearing behind the man he had become. The hardest part wasn't losing him. It was realizing I was losing myself. Piece by piece, in the name of love, I stopped writing altogether. That brown notebook, the one I used to carry everywhere, started gathering dust on a shelf. Because every time I tried to write, I'd see us. And I couldn't bear to put that pain into words. One evening, I asked him if he still loved me. He looked up from his laptop, confused. "Of course I do," he said, as if love was something you could schedule between emails and deadlines. But love isn't a checkbox. It's the warmth in your eyes when you look at someone and see them, really see them. And I couldn't find that warmth anymore. We still lived together, shared the same roof, same meals, same bed. But the distance between our hearts had grown into something vast and cold. It's strange. You can sleep beside someone every night and still feel completely alone. There were no big fights, no screaming, no betrayal, just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that makes you feel invisible. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at nothing, lost in thoughts he'd never share. And I'd wonder, where did we go wrong? When did our laughter turn into politeness? When did love turn into endurance? But I never asked again. Because by then, I knew the answer wouldn't change anything. So I began to plan my escape quietly. Not out of anger, but exhaustion. I folded my clothes carefully, packed my favorite books, wrote one last note for him. You don't lose people all at once. You lose them slowly, in the moments you stop noticing them. I didn't want him to beg me to stay. I just wanted him to notice that I was leaving. That's all I wanted. To be noticed. One last time. The night before I decided to leave, the house felt different. It wasn't just quiet. It was empty. Even though he was sitting right there across the room. The TV was on, but neither of us were watching. The soft flicker of light kept crossing his face, and I kept thinking how strange it was to sit so close to someone and still feel like you were miles apart. I wanted to say something, anything, but every word felt useless now, like a match trying to light a soaked candle. He scrolled through his phone, the glow reflecting in his eyes. Eyes that once looked at me like I was the only thing that made sense in his world. Now, I was just background noise. I'd spent weeks pretending things were fine. I smiled when I didn't feel like it, laughed at things that weren't funny, tried to hold on to the small fragments of what we used to be. But every effort just made the silence heavier. You can't love someone into seeing you. So that night, I didn't speak. I just watched him. Really watched him. And it hit me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was empty. The kind of empty that feels calm, like the end of a storm. I went to our room, opened the closet, and stared at my suitcase. It was still tucked away at the back, under old boxes, half buried like a forgotten secret. I pulled it out. My hands were steady this time. As I started folding my clothes, the memories came flooding back. The first trip we took together. The time he carried me in the rain because my shoes broke. The night he stayed up holding my hand when I couldn't sleep. They weren't lies. They were just old truths. Love can be real and still not last forever. That's the part people don't tell you. Each shirt, each photo, each little thing I packed carried a version of me that had tried. The girl who waited for texts that never came. The woman who said, "I'm fine," when she was falling apart. The lover who kept hoping silence meant peace, when really it meant the end. I remember standing by the window that night, looking out at the city lights. The world outside kept moving. Cars rushing by, people laughing, life happening. And it made me realize something. My life had stopped revolving around me. It revolved around someone who didn't even notice I'd disappeared. That realization didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. It was just freeing. The next morning, he woke up before me. He made coffee, scrolled through the news, went through his routine like always. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching him, wondering if he'd even notice the packed bag in the corner. He didn't. He kissed my forehead before leaving for work. It wasn't love, it was habit. And that's when I knew I couldn't do it anymore. Love shouldn't feel like routine. It should feel alive, even in silence. So I spent that day preparing quietly. I cleaned the kitchen one last time, watered the plants, left a few of my books on the shelf. The ones he used to say smelled like old memories. I wanted to leave pieces of me behind, not to haunt him, but to remind him I was real. I existed. By afternoon, I sat on the floor with that brown notebook in my hands, the one I hadn't opened in months. Its pages were yellowed at the edges, the ink fading in some places. I flipped through old words, old dreams, and then I wrote something new. I don't hate you. I just can't keep waiting for you to see me. My hand trembled a little when I closed it, but inside, I felt lighter, like I had finally said everything I'd been holding back. When he came home that evening, he didn't notice the packed suitcase. He didn't notice the note on the table. He just walked past me, said he had a long day, and went straight to shower. And I just stood there, watching the steam fill the mirror, thinking, this is what it feels like to be invisible to someone you love. Dinner was silent. Not the kind of silence that needs words, the kind that feels permanent. Every sound, the clink of the spoon, the ticking of the clock, echoed louder than our voices. Afterward, he sat on the couch again, eyes lost in his phone. And I sat across from him, looking at the man I'd built my life around. I wanted to scream, to ask why he stopped loving me, to ask what I did wrong. But what was the point? You can't wake someone who's not asleep, just gone. So instead, I whispered something so low, even I could barely hear it. Goodbye. He didn't hear it. He never did. That night I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I just waited for morning, the moment I'd finally walk away. I didn't know what those next hours would hold, that 3 words would change everything. All I knew was, by sunrise, I'd be gone. And maybe, finally, he'd notice my silence. Morning came quietly, the kind of morning that doesn't ask for attention. Soft, gray, and heavy, like the sky was holding its breath. I woke up before him. For a moment, I just lay there watching him sleep. His face looked peaceful, almost like the man I'd fallen in love with years ago. It was strange, how love can disappear in life, but still linger in memories. I wanted to memorize him one last time, the curve of his jaw, the way his hair fell slightly over his eyes, the faint scar on his chin he got from shaving too fast the morning we were late for our first trip together. For a second, I felt that ache again, the old one, the one that whispered, maybe it's not too late. But it was, because love shouldn't only live in memories. I got up, quietly dressed, zipped the last of my suitcase and stood there, staring at the room we once called ours. Every corner held a piece of us, the wall we painted together, the cracked mug on the dresser, the faint smell of his cologne. I had imagined leaving 1,000 times, but I never thought it would feel this. Still, no drama, no tears, just the sound of the suitcase wheels against the floor. When I walked toward the door, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd wake up and stop me. He didn't. I reached for the handle. My hand was trembling, not from fear, but from finality. It was over. But just as the metal clicked under my fingers, I heard his voice, soft, rough, half asleep. Where are you going? I froze. For a second, I couldn't move. I turned slowly. He was sitting up on the bed now, eyes squinting against the morning light. There was confusion on his face, the kind that comes when you realize the silence you'd ignored finally means something. "I'm leaving," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake this time. It surprised me, the calm in it. He blinked, processing the words like he couldn't quite believe them. "Leaving?" he repeated, as if it was a foreign word. I nodded. He stood, took a few slow steps toward me. "Why?" he asked, and I almost laughed. "Why?" "Because you stopped seeing me. Because I stopped existing in your world long before this morning. Because sometimes love isn't enough when one person stops trying." But I didn't say any of that. "Because I can't keep being invisible," I whispered. For the first time in months, he really looked at me. And I mean, looked. Like he was seeing me for the first time. The exhaustion in my eyes, the quiet strength in my posture, the pain I'd hidden behind silence. His lips parted, like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. I turned back to the door, and that's when it happened. Those 3 words. They weren't loud. They weren't desperate. They were just honest. "I need you." Something in me stopped, like the air was pulled out of the room. Not "I love you." Not "don't go." Just "I need you." I turned around slowly. His eyes were wet. Not from guilt. Not from pity. But something deeper. Regret. Realization. He walked toward me. Slowly, cautiously, like approaching something fragile. "I know I stopped showing it," he said quietly. "I know I've been gone even when I was here. But I need you. Not because I'm lonely, because I finally realized you're the only person who ever stayed when I didn't deserve it." I didn't know what to say. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. Part of me wanted to run into his arms, to believe him, to start over. But another part, the part that had spent nights crying silently beside him, whispered, "Be careful. Words can be beautiful lies." "I can't keep doing this," I said, my voice barely holding steady. "I'm tired of being the only one who tries." He nodded, a single tear falling down his cheek, something I'd never seen before. "I know," he said, "and I don't expect you to stay. I just needed to tell you before you walk out. I need you to know that you mattered, that I see it now. Everything you did, everything you were. I just realized too late, and that's when it broke me. Not because of the words themselves, but because I could finally feel the truth in them. He did see me now, but only at the end. I stepped closer, close enough to feel his breath, but not close enough to fall again. "You should have said it sooner," I whispered. He closed his eyes. "I know." The silence between us was heavy, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of everything we never said, everything we lost. I wanted to hate him, but all I felt was peace, because at least now he understood. I touched his hand, one last time. "Take care of yourself," I said softly. He looked at me like he wanted to stop time, but I turned, lifted my suitcase, and walked out. As the door closed behind me, I heard his voice again, muffled but clear. "I'll wait for you." Maybe he would. Maybe he wouldn't. But for the first time in years, that wasn't my burden anymore. I wasn't leaving because he asked me to stay too late. I was leaving because I finally remembered how to love myself again. The first few hours after leaving felt unreal, like I had stepped out of someone else's life and was still waiting to wake up. The city looked different that morning. Sharper somehow. Louder. Or maybe it wasn't the city that changed. Maybe it was me. For so long, I had been numb. Now, every sound felt alive. The distant hum of traffic, the cry of a street vendor, the faint rustle of wind brushing through my hair. I walked without a plan, suitcase trailing behind me, the wheels clattering against the pavement like a quiet drumbeat of freedom. People passed by, faces unfamiliar, lives rushing forward. And for the first time in years, I wasn't rushing toward anyone. I wasn't waiting for a message, a call, a reason to stay still. I was just me. I found a small cafe by the corner, the kind with chipped wooden chairs and music that hums in the background like an old memory. I ordered coffee, sat by the window, and just stared out. It felt strange, being alone without feeling lonely. My phone buzzed a few times. Messages from him. I didn't open them. Not because I was angry. I just didn't have the energy to reopen wounds that were finally starting to close. Instead, I took out my brown notebook, the one that had been silent for so long. Its pages still smelled like paper and time, faintly yellowed, soft at the edges. I ran my fingers over the words I'd written months ago. You don't lose people all at once. You lose them slowly, and beneath it, I wrote something new. But sometimes, losing them is how you find yourself. My hand didn't shake this time. My heart didn't ache. It just felt right. Days turned into weeks. I found a small apartment near the lake, a quiet place, full of morning light and peace. I started walking every morning, watching the sunrise ripple over the water. The silence that once suffocated me now felt different, softer, comforting, mine. I began writing again. Not about pain this time, but about rediscovery. The little joys I'd forgotten. The warmth of tea on cold mornings. The sound of rain on the window. The feeling of laughter that doesn't need permission. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking of him, not with bitterness, not with longing, just a quiet acceptance. He was a chapter, not the whole book. One evening, weeks later, I found a letter slipped under my door. No name, no return address, just 3 words on the front. I'm still here. For a long time, I didn't open it. I placed it on the table beside a vase of wildflowers, a reminder that some things bloom even after being broken. When I finally opened it, the handwriting was shaky, like the words had been written through tears. He didn't ask me to come back. He just wrote about missing the way I used to hum while cooking, the way I made the house feel alive. He said he'd started going to therapy, that he finally understood what I'd been trying to tell him in all the silences he'd ignored. And then, at the very end, he wrote, "If you ever find it in your heart to forgive me, know that I'll be here, not waiting to start over, but to thank you. Because losing you taught me what love really means." I didn't cry. Not because it didn't matter, but because I'd already healed enough to understand. Sometimes love's purpose isn't to last, it's to teach. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it inside my notebook. It belonged there. Part of my story, not my present. That night, I walked down to the lake. The moonlight stretched across the water like a path, and the wind carried the soft scent of jasmine. I closed my eyes and whispered to the universe. Not for him, but for me. "Thank you," I said softly, "for the pain, for the silence, for the goodbye. Because without them, I would have never found my voice again." And in that moment, I realized something. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't come with fireworks or dramatic music. It comes quietly, like a whisper in your chest saying, "You're okay now." I looked up at the sky, and for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Not because someone made me feel loved, but because I did. The silence that once broke me had become my peace. You know, people always talk about the pain of leaving, but they never talk about the peace that follows. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't to hold on. It's to let go, quietly, without anger, without noise. Just a deep breath and a steady heart. She didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she finally remembered how to love herself. And in the end, that's what healing really is. Not forgetting, not moving on too fast, but learning to stand alone and still feel whole. If you've ever stayed too long in a place where you felt unseen, if you've ever loved someone who forgot how to look at you, then maybe you understand her silence. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's survival. And when you finally walk away, when the noise fades and all that's left is you, that's not the end of the story. That's where you begin again. If this story touched you, take a moment to breathe. Then tell me in the comments, have you ever had to walk away to find yourself again? And if you believe in silent strength, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.